Mabel, Mabel, come on. Let's make a lamp. Okay, let's do it. Let's get some walnut. So for this project, I'm using 1/2-inch walnut plywood. Picked it up at my local hardwood dealer here in town. So for plywood, there's generally a good side and a not so good side. We want to identify that before we start cutting. This side looks pretty good. Let's flip it over, look at the other side. You can see here the match lines for the veneer, for the walnut veneer, are really apparent. So you don't want this to be your outside face. This would be a little bit better for the inside. Flip it back over here. So this will be our outside. See, this side they did a really good job matching the veneer. It almost looks like one solid piece of walnut. Looks nice. So when we're running this through the table saw, we'll want the good side facing up. You seem to get a little bit less tear out on this side that's facing up. Also, we're going to put a little masking tape across our cut line, and that will help reduce the tear out as well. Now we're going to rip this down to 8 3/4 inches wide. One of these days I'm going to get around to figuring out how to use SketchUp so I can create plans so you can download those plans and have a cut list and an assembly plan in case you want to make these. And I really just have no excuse as to why I don't know how to use SketchUp. I took computer-aided drafting in college. We use a different program, but I should know how to use SketchUp and I just don't. So one of these days I'll get around to it. But for this video and these lamps, I'll just do the best I can to give you the dimensions as I go. And of course, if you decide to build this yourself, you can adjust those to fit your needs. Set our fence to 8 3/4. And you'll want to rip a couple pieces because you want everything to be the exact same width. Okay, so next we need to cut the bottoms out of these because the next step we're going to be cutting dado grooves in all these pieces, but the bottom pieces have a shallower dado groove than the side pieces. So you need to cut the bottoms first, and for my bottoms they are 8 3/4 inch wide by 8 1/4 inch long. So these pieces are all the dust out of here. This piece is already cut to the appropriate width. Now I just need to set my stop block here. And I need to vacuum this out to 8 1/4 inch. And I'll do the old masking tape trick to these too. You can find a pencil. I have a really bad habit of putting stuff down. Jeepers creepers. Okay, grab a couple pencils. Oh, there they are on the floor. So I can use the kerf line on the sled here. Tell me where to put my tape at. Clamp it down. It's a really good idea to label these as you go too. So I'm writing bottom. Okay, so I've switched out the blades and put in a dado stack to the exact width of what I need for the 1/2 inch plywood to slide in. You want it to be snug but not so tight you have to force it in, or so loose that you have racking or movement there. So that takes a little adjustability. It depends on the dado stack that you have, so you'll have to play around with that. Use some scrap material until you get that perfect setting. But for the first cuts, we want this to be an 1/8 inch depth cut. I'm going to lower my blade down, and I have these setup bars from Craig. Picked them up on Rockler. I'll put a link in the description if you want to check these out too. But these help you set things up to the exact perfect depth or width that you're looking for. This is the 1/8 depth. Just kind of set it over and straddle the blade, and just lower the blade or raise the blade till it just touches. And you're home. Probably good there, so it's just barely kissing it. And we'll do a test cut just to just to be sure. Okay, so I've got a scrap piece of plywood here we can do a few test cuts on just to make sure everything's set right. What you want is the inside tooth on your dado stack to be at 3/4 of an inch. And that looks good there. So let's do a quick test cut on this piece of scrap plywood. So first we'll just double check that our dado groove is in the right spot. And it is right at 3/4 of an inch in. So that's what we want there. If you want to get these depths pretty darn close to exact, that way this whole box will fit together nice and perfectly square. It looks good there. Okay. Now for the bottom pieces, we're cutting a shallow dado groove, 1/8 of an inch deep. And we want that to run along the shorter side, the 8 1/4 inch side. And you'll see why later when we go to assemble how all that fits together. But just remember to cut on the shorter side. Okay, so now we have our dados cut in our bottom piece. So you have 2 dados on each side, 3/4 of an inch in, and 1/8 inch deep on both sides. Now without moving the fence, we need to adjust the height of the dado stack to 1/4 of an inch now for the next cuts. For the long pieces, we're not doing dado grooves on both sides like the bottom piece, just on the inside. So make sure you have your outside edge facing up. Now you should end up with 2 nice dado grooves on either side, set of 3/4 of an inch in, 1/4 inch deep. Next, we need to cut another series of dado grooves inside these, and that is going to hold our light panels. Now our light panels are made out of acrylic with some fabric attached to it, and I'll show you how to make these a little bit later. Now for the dado groove, for this, I don't have a dado stack that is narrow enough to stack up with shims to make a narrow enough dado groove. Even the smallest setting on this dado stack here, or even just a single blade, is too wide. But what I do have is this other kind of crappy dado set that I picked up at a yard sale or on Facebook or something, I can't remember, that it doesn't make very good dado grooves, but it will cut a groove if I just use one of the blades that has a flat bottom. So if you use a regular saw blade, the teeth are staggered, so you end up with not a flat bottom in your cut, but kind of these wavy groove lines. It ends up all groovy. Now there's nothing wrong with being groovy. I mean, I'm the grooviest guy around, everybody knows that. But when you're cutting dados, you want that bottom flat so the pieces sit in there nice and flat and straight. So you either need to get a dado stack that has a narrow enough blade that will work, or get what's known as a flat bottom grind blade for your bottom grooves. You make the rockin' world, rockin' world go round. Or get what's known as a flat bottom grind blade for your table saw that will cut a flat bottom cut. Flat bottom grooves. One other thing too is this blade is a little bit too thin to be the perfect width for this to fit in after I do one cut. So to make this second dado groove the right width, I'm going to have to make a pass, move the fence, and make another pass until I sneak up on that perfect fit for these light panels. Just want to mention that if you don't have a crappy dado blade, that's okay, or if you don't have a dado stack at all, there are other ways to do this. To cut these wider grooves, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can use a router, if you have a router, or if you have a blade that will cut flat bottoms, like a flat bottom grind blade, or a crappy dado blade like this one, you can just cut your line, move the fence, cut your line, move the fence until you sneak up on that perfect fit. Now for the depth on this part, it's not too crucial to get it perfect because those panels, they kind of just slip in there and they're somewhat of a loose fit. They're not glued in place or anything. They just kind of slide in, and you want some wiggle room anyway, so they slide in there. I'm just going with 1/4 of an inch again. Okay, so the next set of dado grooves that are on the inside of the wider dado grooves here are going to be set in 1/2 of an inch farther in. 1/2 inch in there. Grab a speed square. So I can wrap that mark around the side. Take this here, butt it up against the fence. And if your saw is still plugged in, you don't want to grab the blade with your fingers. Use like a pencil or something to kind of move it, just in case you accidentally turn the power on. You don't cut your finger off. And we'll get this blade lined up so that this side of the blade here, the one closest to the fence, is right on my line there. We'll lock that fence down. So what I'll do is I'll make all my cuts all the same, and then I'll move my fence again and then make all my cuts again so that everything lines up perfectly. Okay, next I'm going to inch the fence over just a little bit that way so that it moves the line inwards a little bit. Just a little fraction at a time. Make a cut, test the fit. Doesn't fit, move it a little bit more, and we'll go from there. I think that will work. You want to make sure that it will slide in past the end where it's folded over, because you're going to be sliding these into place later. Next we need to drill a hole in the middle of the bottom piece, and that's to slide the threaded nipple. That's going to go right through the bottom here, and that's what the cord, the lamp cord, will pass through. Hollow tube, and the light socket threads right onto the end of that. But we want to drill this hole first before we assemble the box, because it's really hard to get to. Easiest way to find the center, something that's square or rectangle like this, is just draw a line from corner to corner, and from the other corner to the other corner, just a little X in the middle. X marks the spot right in the middle. So follow me over to the drill press and we'll drill these holes. And so now that nipple will slide right in that hole. Oh yeah. Okay, so now that that's done, we need to cut our pieces to length. So the long pieces here, which are going to be the sides of the lamp, we're going to cut those to 17.5 inches. And one other piece that you're going to need, didn't show cutting it on camera, but you also need some pieces that are going to be the front panel. And these are a little bit narrower. They're 8.25 inch wide as opposed to 8.75, and no dado groove. So you want them just flat panel. Cut a piece that's 8.25 inch wide. And the length on those is going to be 1/6 and 1/8 inch long. Okay, so we have one last cut to make, and that's one final dado groove, but it's going perpendicular to the other cuts we've made across the side pieces, across the bottom here. And you want that the same width as the wider dado and the same depth at 1/4 inch, and you want that 1 5/8 inch in from the bottom. So the next thing we need to do before we assemble these is put the iron-on edge banding on. And what that is a real thin veneer of the same wood. This is walnut with an adhesive on the back. And you take an iron, cut a piece to length, press the iron on there. That'll heat the glue up, that'll soak into the edge of the plywood, and then you can just trim it off with one of these edge banding trim tools, and I'll show you that. And what that does is, you can see here, plywood, when you cut the edge of plywood, you see all the layers of the plywood. Not exactly the best look for something you're trying to make, so putting this iron-on edge banding on will make it look like a solid piece of wood. And you want to do this on all the edges that will be exposed on all the pieces. And definitely want to do this before you try to assemble, because that would almost be impossible to put on after assembly. You should be able to pick this up at the same place you buy your plywood at, local hardwood dealer. And it's a good idea to have a little scrap piece of wood handy that you can kind of burnish that down once you put the edge banding in place. So get it lined up, kind of let it hang over the edges a little bit, and then just a few passes. You can kind of tell when the glue starts to heat up, it'll stick. and just kind of burnish it down. And that's it. I'll show you how to trim this off once the glue cools down. Okay, now that glue's had a chance to dry on the first edges here, so grab your edge banding trim tool. Just trim that right off. Easy peasy. And then just take a utility knife to square off the ends. Okay, so I've got all the edge banding put on all the pieces here, and I notched out with a utility knife these dado grooves here because the bottom piece will sit in it like that, so you need to notch out this little section right here on both sides for that to sit in there. So we'll just put a little bit of glue down here in the bottom. And I'll just go around and take a wet rag and wipe up any glue squeeze out, especially in the corners, because that will be very difficult to remove later. A couple tricks that I like to use to get glue squeeze out in the corners: I take a pencil and my wet rag, and you can kind of work that down into a tight corner to get some of the glue out. Or sometimes I'll use the tip of my knife too. There's a little bit of glue in a crevice. I'm going to gently scrape that out and wipe it. Okay, so we're coming down the home stretch. I have the acrylic panels cut, and instead of leaving them clear, I like to give them a frosted look. Kind of helps diffuse the light a little bit. The purpose of this lamp is more of a mood light or kind of an accent lighting rather than to actually illuminate a room. The fabric that I put on it diffuses the light some, but an additional processing to make it a little bit more translucent rather than transparent just kind of helps to soften the light a little bit. So how I do that is I clamp them down on the table here, grab the random orbit sander with 120 grit sandpaper, and then just give them a quick sanding on each side. It doesn't take very long at all. Then take it over to the sink and wash it off with soap and water to get rid of the dust, and then we can attach the fabric after that. So up next, we're going to cut the fabric for the panels. It helps diffuse the light a little bit more and gives it that nice soft kind of glow to it. Got this fabric at Hobby Lobby, but you can pick it up wherever fabric is sold. Just try to find something that's not too terribly thick, that light will still shine through, but they'll give you a nice color. Now for cutting these, you want to cut them about an inch bigger than the size of the panels. That'll give you enough to fold over and glue to the edges, so you kind of wrap around the edges. So attaching the fabric to the panels is pretty easy. All you need to grab is a can of... What? What? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So to attach the fabric to the panels is pretty easy. Just grab a can of this 3M high strength number 90 contact adhesive. You want the high strength stuff mainly because it's moisture and heat resistance. I'll spray a coat on here and spray both directions, give it a nice coat, give it a few seconds to kind of turn a little bit tacky. Then I will apply the fabric and I'll flip it over and spray a thin line around the edge to fold the edges over. Okay, we're about to wrap things up here. I did make a few extra cuts off camera because that does get a little repetitive, but I'll show you what you missed. You need a bottom skirting piece here on the bottom. These two. And one of them does need to have a hole in it to feed the power cord through. You've got your vertical pieces right here on both sides. There's a horizontal piece that goes across the top. And then you have your top pieces here. And if you recall the extra cutoff that you had that had the dado grooves in it, I told you earlier to hang on to those. And that's where these will come into play because they snap right on here. And the dado grooves are what hold them in place. Now I've already applied one coat of Danish oil to the inside and the bottom, and I'm only going to do one coat because you don't really see the inside or the bottom. And the outside now I'm going to do a little bit more to it. First I'm going to add this pre-stained conditioner to it so that it takes the finish a little bit better. I have these top pieces just set in place here just to keep the finish from getting here along the edge where I'm going to put the glue to glue this all together. And you don't want to glue this together first before you finish these last pieces. You want to finish these pieces and then insert your panels and then glue the top pieces on. That way you can prevent from getting any kind of finish or stain on the fabric here. Okay, we're ready to go with the Danish oil. Okay, so that's had plenty of time to soak in. Now it's time to wipe the excess off. Okay, now all that's left is I need to remove these pieces here so I can slide the panels in, then glue these pieces in place, and then install the light socket and the electrical cord. And this project is a wrap. Okay, so I'm going to apologize in advance here. I'm pretty much going to just gloss over the installation of the light socket and the cord and the switch. I've already kind of covered that in a previous video. If you want to take a closer look at that, click this link right here. Okay, we're just about ready for the moment of truth. Just have one more thing to do here. We've got the lights off so we can see the light when I turn it on. The little rubber feet on the bottom here. Okay, put the light bulb in. It's time for the moment of truth. Ta-da! And we have light. If this is your first time here, thanks for stopping by. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you checked out the channel. And while you're here, consider subscribing because I post a new video pretty much every week. And if you do subscribe, don't forget to click that little bell icon so that YouTube will send you a notification when I post a new video so you don't miss anything, because I have some exciting videos lined up for the summer here and you won't want to miss any of those. I'd love to get some feedback on this project. Let me know what you think. I am going to be selling these too, so be on the lookout for that. All right, that's it. That's all I got. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you on the next video. That's a wrap. There we go, 8 1/4. Jeez.
Fat bottom grooves. You make the rockin' world go round.